we could give away some money. So my hope is that y'all wrote down yesterday on your cards 1, 2, and 3 and brought them back. Card number 1, you would have written down the number 3,561, and your task was to figure out what that number meant to this group. 3,561 is number 1, right? You all wrote it down? Now, no cheating. Hold your hand up if you wrote down what that number means. Anybody write down what it means? What it represents? Anybody? You wrote it down? You didn't? Come on, well, you got to write, just guess. What the hell? Guess what it means. It's an important number. I'm not going to give you a softball. Don't anybody blurt it out. Write down what you think that number means. And now look at number 3. Number 3 is 172,292. 172,292. What's that number mean to this group? You don't know?
That's the number of drivers Alex needs.
Number of drivers I need.
You better start getting more trucks over here, sir.
Qualified drivers.
172,000 qualified drivers, huh? Come on, somebody's got to have an answer here. There's money on the line. Take a stab at it.
3,561 is the average number of miles our captain drives on the week.
Ooh, that's a hell of a lot of miles, but okay, that's pretty good. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? Yeah, you got nothing to lose. Just make a wild-ass guess. I mean, temperature of Pluto. It could be anything. But it has something to do with this group. 3,561.
Number of motor carriers in the U.S.
That's not a bad guess either, although there's 25,000, but that's a great guess, okay?
The average rate of pay an owner-operator has to have to finance his truck and his livestock per week.
Pretty nice lifestyle.
Joe, that's a really, really good estimation of 3,561. Not what I'm fishing for, though. I'm going to save money here. Nobody's going to come up with it. I was planning on giving $50 away for this one.
How about
Oh, now they're going to start guessing. Yeah.
Unique just to this group? Tar wheels? It's unique just to tar wheels?
No, but everybody in this group should know this number. It's part of your life. It's part of what we've all been talking about. You were going to guess.
Okay, I changed my guess after it's not unique to this group.
How much Bob needs every week, right? 3,561 represents the number of drivers who will change jobs since yesterday at 1 o'clock until today at 1 o'clock. 3,561 drivers change jobs every day in the United States of America. That's the turnover of just the truckload sector. Just the truckload sector. That doesn't include the LTL and all the other private fleets. That's just over-the-road truckload turnover, 3,561. Anyone want to hazard a guess of what it costs you to replace a driver? What do you think it costs you to replace a driver?
Man, I'd probably go upwards to $5,000.
You betcha. You betcha. I got one client that says 10, but they're a tanker operation. It takes forever and a day to keep the guy certified at racks. Anywhere from between $2,000 and $5,000. That's about a $17 billion spend. Think about $17 billion. That even would make like the news with the federal government maybe. I mean, that's real money there with a B, right? This industry spends an enormous amount of money on driver churn and driver turnover. And I'm astounded by the number when I did the math, 3,561. That's an eye-opener, right? How about that 172,292? That one should be even easier for this group. 172,292. What do you think that number is? I'll give you a hint. It comes from the federal government. It's not my number. It's their number. Go for it.
The drivers that the industry needs, is that a shortage number?
No, but although ATA would tell you it's 20 to 30,000, and they raise that number every time I read another article about the driver shortage. 172,000. What do you think? This is really germane to this group. Why y'all join? Why are you in this group?
Number of accidents annually,
That's not a bad guess either.
but it's still a guess.
Why'd you join this group? One of the main reasons you joined this group is to what? Well, share risk, reduce the cost of risk, right?
Prevent accidents, injuries, fatalities.
172,292 is the average cost of a tractor-trailer collision. All collisions included. Not only BI, that includes PDs from the federal government if it's a tractor and a trailer. $172,000 is the average cost of an accident. If you throw a BI in there, it goes to $350,000. If you throw a fatality in there, it goes to $5.3 million. Right out of Federal Motor Carrier statistics. Got it right off the website right before I came down. $172,000, that's why you're in this captive. That's why you're trying to prevent accidents. That's why you're trying to manage and mitigate risk because of that high cost. It's an enormous cost. And it's a big chunk of your revenue. So, I guess I made that more difficult than I needed to make it. Maybe that last one's going to be a whole lot easier, but I'm not going to tell you the question until the end of the day. Right now I'm going to talk about selection. I got 33 slides. This is a pretty quick presentation, and I do want to revisit what we heard just a few moments ago about technology, because we have been involved with technologies such as in-device cameras, GPS systems, G-force, et cetera, for at least 20 years. Big fan like you are of them, but I want to make a couple of comments about them when we get to our model again. Okay, so a little bit about selection. I want to talk just 2 slides on the driver problem to tee this thing up and frame it. I want to talk a little bit about captive realities. Captive realities are juxtaposed against the driver problem, and they make it a little bit more challenging for you, and I'll tell you why. I want to talk about where risk comes from and then talk about selection. I have a paper called Risk Selection is Everything. I highly encourage you to take a peek at it. It's 7 or 8 pages long. It talks once again about the risk management formula and the need to select and hire for drivers who do not take too much risk, and why, if you're in a captive such as this, that's so vital to your safety and to your performance as an organization. The age-old driver problem we talked about yesterday, this is the reality, guys. We've got lots of churn. We have 3,500 drivers changing jobs since yesterday at 1 o'clock to today at 1 o'clock. Churn is a disastrous, expensive mess out there. I appreciate that it's hard to find good quality drivers. It really, really is. And I told you yesterday we're trying to do it, and it's hard. It's really hard. However, juxtaposed against that are the realities that you're in a captive and you've decided to take on a whole lot more risk than the average bear, which means all the more reason you need to hire quality, competent, safe drivers. If you had $1 coverage and you hired a bonehead and he had an accident, your insurance company is going to pick it up. And yeah, over time you're going to pay the piper for that and your rates are going to go up. But it's much more important today to make sure that you're not getting a bad driver into the mix because of the additional risks you're taking. So I view it as kind of like, wow, I had this challenge before called the driver problem, and it's really bad for me and it's bad for all my competitors. But then I joined this captive, and now it's even badder for me because I really, really have to be vigilant with making sure I've got the right people on board. And so how do I do that? How do I get that right person on board? You have to avoid the risky driver. Risk, I said yesterday, comes from drivers, driver behaviors. Everything that device he showed us today is intended to do is, and he even brought up Heinrich's theory. Once again, we keep hearing that let's look at the behaviors. They're right. Let's look at the behaviors and let's try and modify those behaviors. But those behaviors are what lead to accidents. Empty trucks without drivers don't have accidents. It takes a driver, and it's a human behavior that makes an accident happen. We need to avoid risky drivers who take too many risks. All right, and let's go back to our risk management model again. At the base of the model, the cheapest, fastest, easiest way to mitigate and manage risk is to avoid it. Just avoid the dangerous driver. If I can't do that, and I asked one group one time, I says, do you know who your worst driver is? Everybody's going like this. I go, who is it? And it was Stanley over here. It's like, well, why the hell Stanley work for? Well, because he's better than no driver at all. I go, Prove that to me. It might not be so true. Depending on how bad Stanley is to make the rating of worst driver in your fleet, maybe he needs to go and you need to eliminate him too. But you want to eliminate anything that can cause additional risk. And then thirdly, you want to engineer away the risk that you can possibly engineer away. Lane changing warnings, proximity warnings. These are engineering solutions to try and make us a little bit safer. Just like the trunk wouldn't open up yesterday on our car. Airbags, anti-lock brakes. These are engineered solutions to help us become a little bit safer. But here's the problem. Each and every one of us, I told you yesterday, is willing to take a certain level of risk. It's natural, it's inbred, it's part of our DNA. It's what we do, how much risk we're willing to take. If I make you a little bit safer through some engineered solution, you know what your natural tendency is to do? Take a little more risk. We installed anti-lock brakes. There's a great study in the taxi cabs of London. Following distance accidents went up 25%. Why? Because they thought, hey, I got anti-lock brakes. I can follow even closer now. I'll be able to stop in a dime. Children who take karate lessons, these are study after study, who take karate lessons who wear padding have 35% more accidents than children that don't have padding. The more I try and make you safe, if you're a risky person, the more you're going to try and be unsafe on me. It's just who you are. And so I say engineered solutions are great, and I'm a big, big fan of any one of the devices, in-cab, GPS, G-force, etc. However, they come with a big dose of caution. Make sure that your people understand that that silver bullet sitting on their dashboard isn't going to take the place of care, safe, defensive driving, adequate amount of following distance, using my lanes, using my mirrors, using my signals, getting an adequate amount of rest. All of that is still that human factor that comes into play and is probably the most important part of all. And so I'm standing here before you today saying, if you want to ensure the very, very, very best safety results you can possibly do, it all begins with the hiring process. Selecting people who are inherently risk averse, people who avoid risk. And we can assess for that, we can test for that, and we can interview for that. But all too often we don't. All too often we look at that can-do, will-do model and we go, the guy's got the knowledge and the skills, he's got a CDL, he can pass the drug test, and look, he was over here working for Joe for the last 3 years, he must know how to drive a truck, let's hire him. He must be a good truck driver. But that's not necessarily so. Selection is everything. Selection is not recruitment. Again, bifurcate those two things. If you have a recruiter, that's great. That recruiter is Don Draper. Come on down. We got the great job for you. That's it. Stop. Full stop. Don't let them also be the selection protocol. Their job is to attract and to sell and to convince and to persuade. And they should be a really good salesperson right now, by the way. But their job is not to be the gatekeeper. They can't be both. They can't be a good salesperson and the gatekeeper. It's impossible. Not one person can't do it. And so you have to bifurcate. Recruitment is come on down. Selection is not so fast. So you do want to expand your funnel. You do want to attract people who are most like your senior people, as I said yesterday. Because if you attract people who are more like your senior people, who like the same things your senior people like, there's a chance that they're going to stay with you a little bit longer. All right, but selection is really, I've got all these people banging at my door now because my recruiter is just so doggone good. I've got 50 people wanting to apply for one job, which is not true. But I'm standing at the door guarding it and saying, not so fast there, cowboy. We only want to let the best of the best in through this door. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about selection. That's not a selection system. What's the cost of hiring one bad driver? What do you think? Did you ever have a bad driver at Roadway?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah? Yeah?
Yeah, it costs you clients.
Clients?
They, they're inefficient as far as the work. They are usually rabble-rousers with the rest of the group, so they're causing problems all the time.
Sounds like an old guy who used to work in the union world. Rabble-rousers.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And they're usually the guy that doesn't come to work, comes to work drunk, or has an accident.
Okay. What's the cost, though, in dollars and cents? What's the cost of a bad driver? What do you think a bad driver might cost you?
I don't know.
10,000 bucks? 10,000? Guy has a PD in the parking lot, smashes up the fender of your new Volvo. right? Could be 10,000, right?
I had one cost me 12 million in a difference. I'm just, I mean.
I'm with you.
2 fits, you gotta wear it. I mean, that's probably sure the top end, but that's what comes to my mind.
Yep, so 10,000 bucks for a PD, $100,000 for a BI, slips off the back of the trailer and has a back injury, runs an intersection, crashes into a minivan, $1 million claim or more, right? One bad driver behaving improperly or unsafely for one moment in time, that $12 million claim probably happened inside of a minute.
It had a bad manager too, so I guess you could divide that by 2 and say 6 million.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. One bad driver can buy you the farm, can't it? I mean, we work a lot in the school bus business. A school bus driver makes about $11 an hour, works a split shift, and has no benefits. So they come in early, and by the way, they got 40 kids behind them screaming and hollering and cursing and throwing spit wads at the back of their head. Why somebody would do this job is absolutely beyond me. But they come into work, they take all the kids to school, they come back to the barn, they call it the barn, and they play checkers or dominoes or something like that for 2 or 3 hours, and maybe they go to the store and come back, and then they do it again in the afternoon. Who applies for that job? Who has that job? What level of competency and skill and caring? And they're all over the ballpark, certainly. But one bus driver, one school bus driver on a single day can lose control, go over the edge, down into a quarry. We could have 40 or 50 kids dead, right? One behavior, just one day. And so I am always looking at large populations where one person can screw the pooch. If we think back to Chi-Chi, was it Chi-Chi's? There was a Mexican restaurant. One person didn't wash the onions at one restaurant, and the next thing you know, the entire restaurant chain is bankrupt, is out of business, because one person didn't wash onions one day. Probably somebody making $6 an hour in the back of the kitchen. So you were in a little bit better position. Your drivers certainly better paid, more qualified, better educated and trained, but on any given day, one driver can make the mistake that buys you the farm. And we have to avoid that. We have to be vigilant. We have to be very careful. We have transferred and shared risk amongst ourselves, knowing that one day somebody is going to do something boneheaded and it's going to cost us, and we'll spread that out. But as a group and as individuals, we want to avoid those drivers who are likely to take those risks, who jump out of airplanes, who ride motorcycles without helmets on, who go spelunking, who go scuba diving, and all the other risky things that we can do for entertainment. Remember that teeter-totter I showed you yesterday where people say, well, you know, this is worth the risk. I'm going to stand on the top edge of this ladder, or I'm going to do something silly because of the joy or the pleasure or the benefits that I can get from it. We have to avoid that person. So the cost of a bad driver, to your point, in Connecticut is, yes, accidents and injuries, CSA problems. They're less than compliant. Lost customers, driver turnover. And guess what? It's a bell curve, folks. You've heard of the 80-20 rule. 10% of your people are studs. They're great. 80% in the middle, and they're kind of like sheep. And 10% over here are a pain in the butt. And they cause you 90% of all your headaches and strife and drama and problems. Right? Think about it. You focus all your energy on 3 or 4 drivers. They're a pain in the butt. So, going back to my risk management model, if at all possible, let's eliminate those guys from the mix. Send them down the street. You always will. In fact, Jack Welch of GE fame came up with this thing called top grading. Top grading is every quarter, every manager has got to rate all of their employees A, B, or C. And there has to be this distribution of how many A's, B's, and C's you get, but you got to have a couple of C's. All the C's, by policy, are put on notice, and they have a 90-day workout plan to either get better or get fired. It's draconian as hell, because what if I got like 5 studs? Somebody's got to be the C. You know, it's like, oh my God, now I got to fire Jim over here because he's the C. It's a very draconian process, but you're right. There is always somebody at the bottom of the pile. But hopefully we take that whole bell curve and shove it to the right, just one standard deviation, and so your worst is just average, as opposed to what we might find at some of the other carriers who are, we won't call them, I guess we will call them bottom feeders. There's some other carriers out there that are less than scrupulous and certainly not managing their business like you are. I know them, I've been to them, I've visited them, And their level of vigilance and scrutiny during a selection process is about, what'd you say yesterday, you went like this, 0.0? Yeah, it's nil and void. It's like, you know, we even sent out, as a joke, we sent mirrors out as kind of a marketing piece that said, hold this underneath the guy's nose and see if it fogs the mirror, and then he's hired, right? And so some people were offended when I sent that mirror out to them. It was just a little, like a makeup mirror. Some people were offended and says, oh, we do much better than this. Of course you do. I'm spoofing. I'm making fun of this. I said, another guy says, hey, this is a good idea. I'll put this into my selection process, right? All right, so yeah, you're not a cut above. You're 17 cuts above the average, and I expect that from you. That's why you're in this group. These guys cause you all of your drama, headaches, and strife. Let's talk about a good driver for a minute. See if you agree with my idea of a good driver. Oh, this good driver is fit, mentally and physically. Safe, avoids risk. Reliable, shows up on Monday after Friday payday. Flexible. Hey, Bob, you can't go here today. I have to have you go there. Okay, no problem. I'll go wherever you want. I get paid the same for hunting and shooting as I do for marching. No problem. Friendly, all things being equal. Wouldn't you rather be around friendly people than grumpy people? Efficient, meaning they don't miss a beat, they don't make extra moves, they're very efficient. They're compliant, they abide by the laws of the land, by the federal regulations, by CSA, by any policies you happen to have in place, and by their own internal rule structure. This is the way I do it. I do it this way every time. They're responsible. They take ownership and feel responsible for the care and custody of your equipment, your cargo, and the folks out on the road that they're sharing the road with. They understand that those people out there are amateurs and don't know how to drive. They appreciate that it's their job to make up for that person who's texting and flipping them off. They're patient. We talked about it at dinner last night. Some of us, we said, oh my God, it would drive me nuts. You know, a steady diet of people cutting you off and looking down, you're seeing them text and they're on the phone and all the traffic and everything else. I don't know if I have the patience for it long term. I might be able to do it for a day or two, but after that I'd probably just crank it up and smash into their rear end to teach them a lesson. I don't know. But they're responsible and they're conscientious. Does everybody agree that these are the qualities that we want in a driver? Okay, does anybody here have job descriptions for their drivers? Do you have a job description for your drivers? Take a look at that list for a moment, please, and tell me how many of those words appear in your job description.
I'd say over half.
Really? Well done, you. So you've got friendly?
I don't.
Okay. Compliant?
I don't have compliance.
I bet you have safe.
I do.
Okay.
I do have efficient. I do have responsible.
Excellent. How about you? You got job descriptions for your drivers?
Amen.
No, I'm looking behind you. No? Here's the beauty of putting these words into your job description. If you actually define the job by using these words, you can hire based upon these words, and more importantly, you can fire based upon these words without any recourse whatsoever. And I know you're in employment at will state, but I can fire somebody at my company for not being friendly. I can bring them in and say, you know what? You haven't been friendly. You're fired. It's part of your job description here. What do you mean I'm not friendly? People say you're not friendly. You're not friendly. You're out of here. No recourse whatsoever. It's in the job description. We all want these things in a driver, but rarely do we advertise for these things, and rarely do we try and select and assess for these things. Instead, we sit here in a meeting and we say, yeah, that's a good driver. I'd like that driver. But that's not what we're looking for. What do? In the hiring process today, I can almost guarantee that this is the data that you collect. Is the guy 21 years old or older? Does he have a CDLA license? Does he have a reasonably clean MVR by some standard that we've devised, 1 and 2, 2 and 3, whatever? Can he pass a drug test? Sometimes you look at education, and largely has he got some education and training in defensive driving? Does he have experience? How often have we heard, oh, you got to have 1 year over-the-road experience. You have to have 2 years of over-the-road experience. You have to have 2 years of tractor-trailer all-weather experience, right? Because experience is somehow magically associated with I can drive a truck. So we look at the work history, and guess what? Until last year, we often looked at felony records because a felony would indicate that the person breaks the rules, doesn't always abide by society's guidelines, right? And what did NLRB do to us? They issued guidance that said you can't even have a blanket ban against felons. You can't even have it on your application. If you have it on your application out of the gate, you're out of compliance with the federal law right now. It's called ban the box. Now, you and I would both agree, we want to know if this guy's a felon, and I still concede and concur that you want to know before you make that hiring decision. But what the federal government says is, what if the guy was writing a bad check 12 years ago, and you've got a felony here? He could be discriminated against and culled out of the herd before he even makes it to the interview process. And so what they want you to do on a case-by-case basis is look at the felony record farther into the process and only as it relates to the job itself. There's a 5-page white paper on this, co-authored by Benish, a legal firm, and myself, on how to get around this and how to avoid any kind of a lawsuit. Pepsi.
Clarification, Mark, though, it's not illegal.
It's not illegal, it's guidance. It's guidance.
Depends on what state, what city.
That's right, it's guidance. It's guidance. And the paper gets into that, right? But there are a couple of famous lawsuits against transportation companies where they ended up paying pretty sizable claims for that very reason. You have a question, sir?
So you're saying I'm not even supposed to be asking that. I know it can vary by state, but you're saying I'm not even supposed to be asking that question.
As a blanket, like usually people, in the old days, we had an application, name, you know, address, experience. Have you ever been accused or a felony or whatever? Take that off your application.
So we still ask that. That's why I'm asking.
You may, but it shouldn't be part of the front end of the application. You can do it when you do your background checks. Yeah, I know, it is. And it should be on page 1. But your government got up one morning and said, holy moly, we have 2.2 million people in prison. And when they come out of prison, what the hell are we going to do with them? Put them on welfare? No, we want them to be productive citizens again. They have been rehabilitated, and we want to put them back into the workplace. And so in order to do that, we have to have some kind of a mechanism that obfuscates or hides the fact that they were a felon from all of these innocent employers out there, so the employers will take the rap and hire the guy, and then they're not on the dole for the federal government. It's well intended. It really is. It's well intended. However, it has ramifications. Download and look at the paper. Make sure that your application is within the constraints of the, it's just a 5-page paper. It's really simple to understand. My point in bringing this up, though, are these are the typical data that we collect when we hire somebody. We get an application. We do a DAC background check. We do a PSP, perhaps, and somebody was discussing the values of PSPs yesterday, right? And those are all great mechanisms for finding out some more information about that person. But how in the world can we use this data to make an inference as to whether or not they are any of those things over there? I guess we could say, well, the guy's driven for 3 years and he doesn't have any accidents. We could say he's safe. We don't know if he's friendly. We don't know if he's conscientious. We don't know if he's responsible. What we do know is he hasn't had any accidents, or he hasn't had any entanglements with federales, or he hasn't had you know, too many violations in speed and other reasons that the police. But how many people here have gone over the speed limit in the past week and didn't get caught? Every one of us. So the fact that you did or didn't get caught is kind of a random thing, really. I mean, you probably speed every day or roll a stop sign every day, and we don't get caught. And so we don't really know if this guy has just been lucky or if he really is a safe driver, because this is the only information we're collecting about the person. So not my hypothesis, my claim is there could be more. There could be something else that we could look at, something else that we should look at to determine if this guy is really all those qualities over there. And it goes back to our can-do, will-do model. I said before, they have to have knowledge, skill, and ability in order to be able to do the job. And the application, their experience, their work history, and the MVR would indicate that they can do the job. But all too often we hire people who can do the job, but when they get on board, they turn out to be not such good employees because they don't choose to willingly do the job, to invest the necessary energy, to be engaged in the job, and to align themselves with what the goals of your business are, which are the values, motivations, and personality. Because I cannot change those, I want to be able to assess for those. The truth is I can change knowledge and I can change skills, but I can't change values, motivations, and personality. And by my definition, which is not a great definition, but my definition of abilities, that's the stuff you can't change. I could play one-on-one basketball with Scott, but he's going to crush me every time because he's tall even without his hair. All right, and I'm old and fat and can't jump very much. All right, those are my abilities. I can't learn to get taller. I might be able to get more skillful, you know, at layups or something, kick him in the knee when he's not looking. But the truth is, he's going to beat me every time because of his abilities. And so I can't change those abilities. The same is true of my drivers. They have certain physical limitations. They have certain mental limitations that I can't change. Whatever those are, that's what I call abilities. We want to look at a mechanism that uncovers these qualities or traits. Now, in a perfect world, once again, we kind of have a sense of humor at Avatar, so we created a little video called the Selectometer. It was like one of those late night TV shows or ads where the Ginsu knives but wait, you know, if you call in the next 30 seconds, you get this. And it was just a little funny video making fun of the fact that we would love in the perfect world to have the Selectometer. Guy comes in, sits down, I take the receptomodulators, stick them on his forehead, push the button for driver, technician, manager, supervisor, dispatcher, and it goes ding, 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 and he's a good hire. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It will never exist. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it did? We don't have a selectometer. So in the absence of a selectometer making life easy, we need a process, a standardized, valid, and reliable process. And by standardized, I mean if we are going to hire a driver, every single applicant should go through this process in an identical fashion. It should be objective, not arbitrary, not subjective, but rather objective and based upon actual data that we can write down and track and measure. It should be valid. Anybody know what valid means? Valid means they can't sue us because it was capricious and arbitrary. Valid means that any question, assessment, tool, test, interview item that I use is linked directly back to the real nature of the job, and I can show that linkage in a court of law so that if somebody files a claim, I can say, nope, I put everybody through this. I gave everybody this question, and this person answered the question very poorly, and everybody else answered it well. That's the reason we didn't hire this person. Reliable and predictive means if you can develop assessments, interviews, and other mechanisms to determine this person's characteristics and predict that they'll actually succeed on the job, predict that they'll avoid risk, predict that they'll show up on Monday morning, predict that they'll be good to your customers, predict that they'll be friendly with your dispatchers. That's what we mean by predictive. How do we do that? Well, what we want to do is we really want to understand their values, their motivations, their personality, and their abilities. And somebody's going to talk in just a moment, I think, on abilities and abilities testing, which we're a big, big fan of. We've developed many of these before. Abilities are some form of a physical test given during the hiring process that predicts whether or not this person is physically fit for the job. And I'm sure you'll talk about this, right? And you'll link and tie together the nature of the job, the lifting of the weights, the standing up and down, the number of hours in the seats, to various types of assessments that can be done in a doctor's office or even in sometimes not a doctor's office that predict whether or not this person is physically fit for the job. Anybody that's taking a hunk of risk on the workers' comp side is foolish not to have something like this in place. You don't want to buy somebody's other problem. You don't want to buy somebody that's already half broken, believe me. And this is a way to ferret that out. The more physical the job, the more important a physical agility or a pre-employment physical assessment is. Your jobs are pretty physical. If you were hiring somebody to be a secretary, not so important. If you're hiring somebody to be an astronaut, probably pretty important. We want to make sure that they're physically fit. So she'll talk about that. But it's an important thing because I can't change your abilities. I can't change how tall you are, how visual acuity you are, any of those things. Values. Values are the principles and beliefs by which we make all of our decisions. They're the things that are important to me. My values are very different than your values and very different from his values. Each and every one of us has values, and they guide our decision process. They guide our decisions about, do I do a pre-trip or not? Do I count the freight or not? Do I show up on Monday morning at 7:30 or at 8:30? Do I follow 5 seconds or do I climb up somebody's butt and get them out of my way? Values are all those key guiding principles that really kind of underhinge all of my decision processes. How do we uncover values? By using standardized pre-written questions. A behaviorally anchored interview is one in which you have questions that are pre-written. You read the question and you write down the person's answer, which feels very uncomfortable. And at the end of the interview, you compare their answers to good, bad, or ugly answers, what are called anchors or benchmarks. Malcolm Gladwell says in the book, What the Dog Saw, they did a study of people coming in for job applications and interviews. They showed the first, and they videotaped the moment in which the manager comes out and greets the applicant, shakes their hand, without audio. Without audio, they videotaped the first 5 seconds. They showed the clips to college students and said, who got hired? And they were 65% right. All they saw was the first 5 seconds of this with no audio. And 65% of the time, they were able to predict whether or not the person got hired. What does that tell us? That tells us that we buy the book by the cover. That tells us that we hire people who are like us. That tells us that we don't use a lot of scientific rigor in the selection process. We just don't. And we don't do it with truck drivers. I remember sitting in Iowa one time with a very successful truck company, and I was trying to explain the benefits of a structured interview to him. He goes, young man, I just know a good driver when I see one. I see him walking across the lot, and I know a good driver. I go, yeah, and you have 115% turnover. And you just had a $5 million accident last month. Do you really know a good driver? I don't think you really do. You think you do, and you think you know a good from a bad one, but you don't. So you need structured interviews with pre-written questions. These are, of course, in your captive, available to you for free as part of the service. A behaviorally anchored interview actually is a test. And we're not going to say, what do you want to do in 5 years? Nor do we say, what would you do in this situation, which anybody can spin a yarn and come up with a tale. Rather, a structured interview is a test about what they have done, and it uncovers their values. For example, the test item or the interview question could be, give me a time in your past when you were asked to run over hours. It happens all the time. I understand it's just a natural part of the job. You were asked by your dispatcher or fleet manager to run over hours. What was the situation? What did you do? And what was the outcome? When they answer that question, and they'll have an answer for it, you can uncover a whole trove of how they feel about safety and what their values are. Give me an example of when you saw someone having a fire. Give me an example when a customer cussed you out or you saw a customer cussing somebody else out. What did you do or say and what was the outcome? These are actual test questions on how they've behaved in the past in their job. And you've got 10 of them. That's all it takes, 10 questions. The first time you do it, it's uncomfortable. It's like, oh, no, I just want to sit down and have a beer with the guy and, hey, how you doing? What's going on? No, you want to give this guy a behaviorally anchored interview and measure those answers against the anchors and give him a grade somewhere between 20 and 50 and say, this guy's a 40, that guy's a 30, and this guy's a 10. I'm not going with the 10 today. Now, you're not ready to do that yet because you want every driver you can get. But over time, if you start to use the interview and uncover the values, you'll have a really good sense of that person sitting across the table from you and whether or not they're going to go out, wreck your truck, or take good care of your truck. You uncover values through a structured interview. You uncover motivations through some form of a realistic job preview. I don't think anybody here has an RJP today, but we make them. And you don't have to have a video-based one. It could be a ride-along. It could be meet with a driver for an hour. Or it could be just a really well-done job description. But the #1 cause for turnover during the first 6 months, everybody knows this, is unfulfilled expectations, right? Boy, I thought I was signing up for X, but it turned out to be Y. This isn't the job I really thought I was signing up for. And so unfulfilled expectations are the result of a wrong perception. The driver thinks, okay, I read the ad, I heard it from the recruiter, I'm going to be home on Thursday night, or I'm not going to work weekends, or whatever, I don't have to hump freight, whatever it is. They have this perception of what the job is. A realistic job preview seeks to make sure that they truly understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of the job. Look, guys, it's called work for a reason. We're going to pay you for a reason. There's work involved here. These are the good things about the job. Here's the not so good things. We run into New York City all the time. It's a pain, I understand. Or we have to sit over at the border going into Canada. Or whatever. You have to check your reefer every 2 hours. Whatever it is, there's some aspect that makes it the work, and you want to make sure that you get that out in the open. Yesterday I referred to what we did at Keenan, a company, in which we had a document that says, here's what the job is, everybody sign the piece of paper, here's your red ticket to complain if we didn't keep our promises. That is essentially a version of a realistic job preview. And RJP makes sure that the person self-assesses and says, yep, I understand what the job is, this is really what I want to do. Now, it's still possible that you go through this effort and you hire them and they start and they go, you know what, I said it was okay to unload tires 4 stops in the middle of the night to a bunch of tire stores, but now that I've been doing it for a couple of weeks, it really sucks and I don't want to do that. You're still going to have that, but you're going to have less of that than if you don't even bring it up in the first place. And RJP just gets everybody on the same page about the true nature of the job. The third element is personality. Again, for those of you using Applicant Care already, the DOBI is a validated pre-employment personality assessment that gets at these constructs of compliance, conscientious, customer focus, independence, integrity, and safety orientation. It's 37 or 38 questions. It takes about 5.5 minutes to do online, and you get a score for your driver in aggregate across those constructs, what we call constructs or dimensions of personality, and you get an individual score for each one of those. And so you can drill down and say, wow, the guy's in the yellow, but as I drill down and I get into safety, he's way down here at the very bottom end of the pile. Well, I've got an issue. I'm in a captive. I've got a lot of exposure here. I'm not sure I want to go with this guy. Or conversely, he might be really, really good in safety, but not so good in customer focus. Okay, maybe I'll put this guy on drop and hook. Maybe I'll have him just spot trailers over here. He's a really good, safe driver. I just don't want him talking to my customers too much. All right, again, this is just one other snapshot to look at something you cannot change. You can't change their safety orientation. You can educate them, and you can teach them defensive driving, but if they're a risk taker, they're a risk taker, they're a risk taker. That's all it is to it. That's what this does. So these 3 devices collectively come together, well, actually 4, when you include the physical ability test, come together to assess for those items that you cannot change in a person and help you find better drivers. The cost of one bad driver, injuries, accidents, cargo losses, CSA, loss of customer contests, all the drama and strife. I am here to say that the #1 risk management tool you can use is to avoid unsafe drivers. You can buy your devices and put them in your truck. You can transfer your insurance through the brisk Tar Wheels captive and save money. But at the end of the day, and you can train your drivers and you can put safety programs in place and bonus programs in place and posters on the wall, and we do all of it. We love all of it. We believe in all of it. But the #1, fastest, easiest, most efficient way to manage risk is to simply avoid risk. One bad hire can hurt you. Avoid the risk, avoid the problems, start at the bottom of the risk management formula. Retiring CEO of Pepsi about 3 years ago was said, what's the one lesson you'd like to impart to our MBA class here at Harvard? He says, I learned over time that the biggest mistake I ever made was trying to fix people who couldn't be fixed. This is a CEO, and I'm sure he's thinking of high-level executives where you hire somebody and you keep hoping against hope that they're going to turn around and one day they're going to be better. We have a saying in my Vistage group, which is CEOs, you hire very, very slowly and carefully, and you fire very quickly. Cut your losses quickly. Don't keep trying to fix somebody that can't be fixed. And the same goes for drivers. Hire slowly and carefully, fire quickly if you think that they're going to harm you or hurt you. That's the biggest lesson he's learned in his entire career. Don't try and fix people that can't be fixed. And by fixed, I mean, if they lack knowledge or skill, fix them, sure. Educate them, train them. But if they're just simply going, I ain't doing this, no, you can't fix that. You just can't fix that at all. You got to cut your losses and go. Any questions on selection? Selection is a strategy for reducing your risk. It's not taking away from anything else anybody has said, including your device provider here. I'm just saying selection is the fastest, cheapest way to do it. It's also very difficult, right? You got 10 trucks up against the fence. Holy moly, I want every driver I can get right now. And this guy just thought I should be more vigilant. Crud! I have to say no to somebody? Really? Well, again, go back to that recruiting. Get more people to the front door, then you can say no to a couple of the bad ones. Okay. Everybody good? Break time? Oh, yes, sir.
You know, I've had the privilege of working with 4 reputable organizations, all different sizes, and it always seems like the operations view of a good driver isn't always the same as what, like, the safety director is. And, you know, you always try, hopefully at some point, that that top down, you're looking at that driver. I just don't know if you had any comments on that perspective, because I mean, every company I work for has regularly been, well, that's my best driver, you can't take him.
Wow.
And I'm talking about more that retention inside of trying to manage out the guys that you see as risky behavior, and back to, okay, these are the only times you're getting caught. So, you start putting that, man, you've risen, I have 300 drivers, and I only have 8 that look like you do, and trying to manage out what you call the poor safety performer.
Yeah, but let's go back to that comment about the operations, because I was with the president of a flatbed company who, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, doesn't use electronic logs because the guys can't make enough money like that. He's an old truck driver himself. Now he owns his own company, and he truly believes, screw those rules, screw those regulations. So his operations people think that what you and I might call a cowboy, somebody running, way too many hours, way too many miles, maybe keeping a comic book in the back pocket. Everybody familiar with that term, right? Okay. He thinks that those are his best drivers. I go, those aren't your best drivers. Those are the bombs waiting to go off, man. I said, one of those guys is going to crash one of these days, and you're going to really be sorry that you're thinking this way. And so if an operations guy says he's one of my best drivers, what is the criteria by which they say best? Is it because he does everything they ask him to do? Is it because he'll run over hours when necessary? Is it because he'll take an unsafe truck and I don't have time to get it fixed right now, or I got to get it to the customer? We know that there are operations and dispatch people out there like that. And so you have to say to somebody that says, he's my best driver, why is he your best driver? Give me an example of why. The Japanese call it 5 why. They say if you ask the question why 5 times, you'll get to the root of the problem, right? The guy says, well, because he gets my loads there on time. Why? Well, because every time I ask him to do something, he does it for me. Why? Because he's worried about his job and he's a very dutiful employee. Why? Well, because I pay him a little extra. Why? Because he does what I needed to get done. You start driving down into those 5 whys and you'll get to whether or not that operations guy is got his head on straight about what a good driver is or not. And so safety and I've been both. I was operations for 15, 20 years before I went into safety. They should be symbiotic. As a matter of fact, you can't improve safety without also inherently improving your operations. It happens. I've watched it happen. Once I have a safer operation, I have a more efficient operation, I get more done, I get more productivity, I got better quality control and better customer service. They're all tied together. So ask the question. Okay? Yes, Joe?
You didn't mention the fact that there's another way to screen drivers, but our litigious society doesn't do us any favors.
It's sure not helping, is it?
Seeking references.
Exactly. You know how underwriters operate? They look at all your past losses for the last 3 years and they make an inference. Okay, Joe had this many losses each of these 3 years. We'll base his insurance based on that, right? That's because we're creatures of habit. We tend to repeat these behaviors and patterns. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could call up or email or write to that past employer and they say, you know what, he was a scumbag. He was just terrible. Every time we turned around, he was pissing off a customer, he was getting in fights with the other drivers, and more than 15 times in a row we had to have him counseled and blah, blah. They're not going to say that. And the irony of ironies is your federal government says you must do background checks. This is the biggest waste of paper on the planet. We have to do background checks, and the guy's been to 12 companies in the last 6 years, and now we have to get all these different background checks, which every single one of them says what? Dates of hire, date of termination. That's all there is. So what is the purpose in doing that? And now if the government came out and said you have to do background checks, and by the way, everyone is protected by some special law that if they say he's a dirtbag, you can't get sued, that might be a good world, but that's not the world we live in. And to your point, I wish we could get decent background checks. I didn't even put it up. I know. You know, I spend hours and I spend thousands of dollars doing background checks every month. And for what? To satiate some federal 391.41 requirement on a piece of paper. It's meaningless. I hate it.
And Kevin will appreciate this. I had a phone call from a individual, I won't name any names, but I know from a fact from being around the area, the person's been on workers' comp twice in the last 6 months and wanted to change jobs. in a similar job to what we do, and I told him we didn't have any openings.
Good, good, because you're just ripe for a work comp in that business. I watched it. Of course, you can help them with those things, right? I bet you can. All right, thanks so much. Let's take a break. You can get yourself set up. Bob left the room, so you're in charge now. All right? Thanks.